welcome to Sonlight's Learning Challenges webinar. Today we have a panel of homeschooling moms who are going to chat with us about the challenges of teaching kids both who struggle in some areas of their learning and who may be accelerated in their learning skills. I'd like to introduce those who are joining us. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Judy. I'm a longtime Sonlight user. Work for Sonlight as their customer champion and also spend spring and summer traveling to different conventions here in the Northeast. I'm a homeschool mom of 17 plus years, have 3 kids that we've homeschooled. One is graduated from college, one is in college, and I have one still in high school. Jill, how about if you introduce yourself for us today?
Yeah, my name's Jill, and I live in the Bluegrass area of Kentucky. I've homeschooled for 17 years and have 5 children, and my kids are all grown now and out on their own. My last one will graduate from college in December. I also, like Judy, do conventions for Sonlight in the spring, and I'm glad to be here today.
Thanks for joining us, Jill. Kelly, how are you today?
I am fine. A little bit hot down here in the south, but I'm enjoying my air conditioning. I'm a homeschool mom of 19 years. My youngest has graduated also, but is still in college. And I used Sonlight predominantly through my homeschooling years. Loved it, and just enjoy continuing to encourage homeschoolers as I travel to conventions and do webinars, etc., with you ladies.
Thank you, Kelly. And we also have Mary joining us today. Hi, Mary. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing pretty well. I have also used Sonlight for a number of years. We've been homeschooling for 9 years here, and I have 2 kids. They are going into 9th and 7th grades this year, so we're excited to tackle high school.
There you go. Well, thanks for joining us, Mary. And last but not least is Brenda. How are you today, Brenda?
I'm doing great, and I've been homeschooling for 22 years here in Georgia. Yeah, with my 5 kids, and my oldest is going to be starting using Sonlight with her kids in this fall, so that's great. And my youngest is still at home, and he's 13.
Well, thanks for joining me today, ladies. I think we're going to have an awesome time chatting about some things that are very near and dear to your hearts, and let's get started. Kelly and Jill, how about if we talk for just a minute here? Definition of a learning challenge. I want to make sure as we start our conversation that folks understand what exactly it is we're going to be discussing. So why don't you go ahead, maybe each of you can take part of our definition here and talk a little bit about what we plan to discuss today.
Well, I think we first of all have to say we're not experts in this area. We are moms with trench experience, but that's about the extent of it. So we're going on someone else's definitions, basically. But I think we also have to remember that challenges can go in both directions. So we often think of challenges as the things that make it hard, where your child might struggle with flipping letters or having trouble with blending sounds or visualizing math functions. But there's the other side of the challenges, maybe more so on mom than the student, where they would excel. Like, Jill, you can describe that side of it.
Yeah, and I think both things really have special challenges to the parents, and that's what we want to talk about today is how if your child is either maybe not doing well in more than one area. I mean, all children have things that they excel at least one thing they should, and maybe a thing that they don't do well at. But a child who what we're talking about are ones that either struggle in many ways or excel at practically everything. They're at one end of the scale or the other compared to the norm, and that can present a lot of challenges for the parents.
Great. So we do want to just also make one note. We're not going to talk specifically about diagnoses today. None of us are trained in the field of diagnosing specific learning disabilities. And so while we certainly may mention them as far as our own experience goes, I do want to add the disclaimer that this is not meant to be a specific discussion of different diagnoses. So now that we kind of have defined the parameters for our conversation, I'd like to draw you, Mary, and you, Brenda, into our conversation and talk about probably what is the first question that most parents ask themselves when they realize that their students are somehow struggling with their learning, whether they're ahead of their peers or whether they're behind their peers. A lot of them ask the question, can I do this? And so maybe we can break it down and talk about different ways that absolutely you can do this thing of educating a child who in some way has some learning challenges. So let's talk first about resources that are available out there for folks who find themselves in need of some sort of outside assistance when it comes to educating their children. So Brenda and Mary, either one of you, both of you, what have you found practically works in this arena of resources for educating your children?
Well, one thing I think is really important is, when we first start to think about our child having a struggle, I think we just get overcome with fear. Like you said, can I do this? And I think it really has helped me to be a part of a local homeschool support group, start asking questions, start talking to other moms. We tend to get intimidated by the moms maybe whose kids maybe are excelling in one area or another, and I'm thinking, well, we're having struggles in certain areas, and, does anybody else struggle? And when you start talking with others, you find out that lots of kids struggle. And so we really need to be networking with other homeschoolers in our area and find out what resources are available right in our communities and in our area.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I am coming from the viewpoint of someone with a kid who was extremely advanced, and I had to deal with the fact that my third grader outpaced me in math. And
I have been there.
But you have to know your own weaknesses and be willing to reach out to other parents or other resources in the community to help you in the areas that your kids are definitely going to pass you up in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Mary, you mentioned support groups. How do you go about finding those?
Well, I talked with people at my church. Sometimes you run into homeschoolers at the library. I've looked online for our state group to find out what groups were in our area. So I looked at those different ways of finding a local support group.
Great. Well, I think one of the things that we certainly want to talk about, since we have all obviously introduced ourselves as homeschooling moms, is, if you've got a child that's accelerated in their learning and outpaces you in math by third grade, or if you've got a child who struggles with one area of learning, is homeschooling even possible?
Oh, yes. Yes.
I think even a very positive thing, because you can tailor the education for your child's needs, and whatever areas they're advanced in, you can continue to give them things that are on their level, and whatever areas they struggle in, you can take it at their pace. If you have a kid who struggles, you can use a mastery-based learning so they can develop confidence and so they can learn things one step at a time and really be able to progress forward. So yes, I think it's been a very positive thing to homeschool.
Could you give an example of something like at your house, how that would look, or if you're going to make an individual plan so that your child can succeed, like you said with mastery or something, how would that work? What subjects would you do that in, or how did that look with your children?
Well, one subject that we really struggled in here was with spelling, and tried lots of different curriculum and what would work, and finally stumbled across an Orton Gillingham-based spelling program called All About Spelling, which Sonlight now also sells. But when we started that program, it was already laid out for me and was very incremental, was logical, was mastery-based, and I think that's when I really clued in, oh, this is what we've been looking for. And then I started looking for those attributes in other programs. My son didn't struggle so much in math, but sometimes got frustrated with math, and I realized, oh, this was an issue with the type of approach we're taking. And so I looked for that kind of approach in a math program. So, yeah, stumbling across the approach that will work for your child, I think, is an important key.
It reminds me of something that I think Kelly always says. As you always say, Kelly, be a student of your child. And as parents, we can really be a student of our child or a few children a lot better than kids in a big classroom. So we are the perfect people to teach our kids at home, even though we might feel scared, like you said, Mary.
And no
You
one
know,
knows
even
as much.
Mm-hmm.
A very wise man once told me that if your child is having problems with a curriculum or a particular subject, don't jump to the assumption that it's a heart issue, that they're just being rebellious.
Yeah.
First, look to see if you're teaching them in a way that they can understand it.
Yes. Yeah, I think another conclusion it's easy to jump to is, is a kid lazy? They just won't do, they just aren't applying themselves, especially if you can see a child that has a mix of giftings in one area and struggles in another. It's easy to jump to that conclusion, well, they're being lazy in this area because they don't like it or it's hard work or whatever, and that often isn't true.
And I
Or when you've got,
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, if you've got a kid who is very, very advanced, it's easy to expect them to keep being very advanced forever. And when they want to plateau and take a break, you need to really listen to them. Just because your 7-year-old won't conjugate Latin verbs, even though you think they absolutely, I did have this issue.
Yes.
It's not the end of the world, and just back off, and it's okay.
And sometimes I think it's probably important to remember that even though that 7-year-old might be able to conjugate Latin verbs, he's still 7.
Yeah, exactly.
And so he may excel in a particular area in his education, but he's still a 7-year-old kid, and so you have to leave room for him to be 7.
Right.
So, well, those are very good comments. I think probably those are some of the most common issues that people face when their kids struggle in some aspect of learning, is just to realize that it's not always laziness or disrespect or whatever. Kids, I think, find it hard to express, especially when they're younger, that I just don't get this, Mom, or I can't figure this out. And so they act out or they react, and sometimes I think we interpret that incorrectly. So if you decide that homeschooling is indeed a good option for you, and Mary, I think you make a good point, homeschooling may be one of the best options for kids who struggle with their learning, because then you can move at their pace and set goals based on their abilities. Does that mean that there are no other educational options? Is it possible to mix homeschooling with something else? Have either of you done that, found that to be successful, found it to be a disaster? What are your thoughts?
Well, we've sourced out both science and math for our kids who are more gifted in that area than I am. And that has been just an incredible godsend for us.
How did you do that? Did you outsource it?
We found a lady in the community who had a degree in advanced sciences, and she was having just small groups with about 4 or 5 kids. And it was just wonderful because she's the kind of teacher who wasn't threatened by the kind of questions my kids asked. She learned very early to say, that's a great question, research it and get back to me and you'll get extra credit.
Wise words for any homeschool mom.
Yes.
Yes.
So we haven't really outsourced any of our main subjects. I've outsourced some of our extracurricular kind of subjects. But one thing that we did find very helpful along the way was we looked into vision therapy, and so that was therapy sessions that we actually did through a developmental optometrist. And boy, that just made a huge difference in my son's ability to read, ability to spell, his confidence with writing, just in all kinds of areas. So I found them a very valuable resource to be able to, talk through what we were going through and then to get help for him.
Well, and if I remember correctly, Mary, you did the vision therapy, and you would go not real often there, and then you would do what they told you to do, the exercises at home, so you kind of combined it. Is that right?
Yes, yes. I was very fortunate that they were more than happy to work with me, and because we were about 2.5 hours away, and then because of the expense, that they would send us home with detailed instructions of what therapies to do each day at home, and then we would go into the office about once a month.
I think that's just so incredible, because a lot of people think they can't afford it or it's too far or whatever, and I don't think they're as think like you did, like, gee, if they could just tell me what to do and I went and check back every once in a while, I could follow it up at home. And I think with homeschooling we can do that if we just, talk to the people that can help us and see if they're willing to work with us that way.
Yes, and I had looked into, there are some books out there that you can try to do it on your own, and when I looked at it, I thought, well, there's so many different directions and so many different things that could be going on. I wanted to have an expert, kind of guide me in that and let me know what to do. But then yes, I could do it at home. So it was a good combination for us.
Yeah, we did kind of that through the public school. My son had a lot of stuttering problems when he was probably 7, 8 years old, and we were able to go free through the public school once or twice a week for a half hour up to school, and then we would work on it at home. So there's a lot of avenues like that a person could explore for their children.
Yes, and that's where knowing your local support group can really be helpful, because I've had friends in our area also go through the public schools for stuttering, and then we also have a really good dyslexia program for kids with dyslexia locally. And, I think sometimes people are afraid. They don't want anything to do with the public school. And I think you need to know your local climate, because public schools aren't the same everywhere. The superintendents aren't the same everywhere. So find out from your local area what's available and what it's really like in your area.
Yeah, because ours were very supportive and very kind, and just would bend over backwards. And if my kid didn't know what the other kids did as far as memorization, they'd say, "What does he know?" I'd say, "Well, he knows like the 23rd Psalm." Okay, they'd work on that with them. They were just willing to go the extra mile. So you're right. If you have some support in your area and find out where to go, it can really save you a lot of time and be very helpful.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like what you ladies are saying is you just had to pursue possibilities for your children. In other words, you had to be proactive. You didn't one day, Mary, all of a sudden think to yourself, I bet my son has visual issues, and then have all the answers. Those were things that you just had to be persistent in pursuing on his behalf. Would that be an accurate assumption?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So I think that's an encouragement that those of us, at least, that are talking here today did not come with all the answers. We had to get out there and look. And
still don't have them.
My kids didn't come with that manual that tells me what
Yeah.
Yeah, we missed out on that one, too. I think probably this is a great segue into talking specifically then about finding teaching tools for your kids. How do you go about finding the curriculum that will work for your child? And actually, Brenda and Mary, please share, but I think Jill and Kelly, you probably have some feedback on this too. We've all homeschooled. Does the curriculum exist out there, and how do you find it?
Trial and error.
There you go. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that, is there?
No, that's part of our homeschool education.
Yeah.
Learning what works.
And it would be so nice to have 5 kids in the same curriculum working exactly in the same way for every single one. But dream on.
Yeah, dream on. Exactly.
It doesn't work that way. So you need to be that student of your child to find out what their learning approach is, what their learning style is. And we've got another webinar on learning styles, so someone could reference that one. But I've also heard one other mom that I was talking with who said she made a deal with her children that it was their job to let her know if she wasn't presenting tools they could use. And she got their agreement, their participation. She said, it's my job to give you the tools, but your job to let me know if those tools aren't working with you, working for you.
That.
And so it was a give and take. It was an understanding that, yes, I might pick something wrong, but you're not stuck with it. If this isn't working, we find something else.
Yeah. When I'm looking for curriculum, I like to, one, go online and ask questions. And, don't necessarily, if somebody doesn't like a curriculum or if somebody really loves it, don't just necessarily, like it because a bunch of other people like it, or don't like it because a bunch of other people don't like it. Again, that goes to being a student of your child and also of your own teaching style. What do people like or not like about it? So ask deeper questions if you can online, and then I like to see as many samples as I can. Sometimes if you look at different distributors, they'll have different samples of the same program up. So sometimes you can get a more well-rounded view of a curriculum, even if you can't see it in person, by being able to look at several websites. And then the last thing I do is when I kind of narrow something down to, maybe 2, 3, 4 different possible curriculum I could use, and all through that process I ask my kids questions about things they like and don't like and kinds of approaches they like and don't like. I show them samples. Even when my son was 7, I did this when I was looking for a math program, because we had struggled with a math program all year long, and then at the end of the year I showed him something else, and he looked from the second book to the first one, and he held up the first one that we'd struggled with all year long, and he said, "The writers of this book don't want kids to understand math."
Yeah, one of those.
So then it was my job though then to probe and find out why. But bringing him into that process, showing him things, and at different times I've shown my daughter things and said, what will work for you, and try to get them to say why or why not. And they can't always answer, but a lot of times I've gotten very useful feedback from doing that.
That's an excellent point. So what
happens? And I think you also have to be willing to bite the bullet. If you made a mistake and something really isn't working, you don't have to sit there and say, well, I've spent some money on this, therefore we are going to finish the year with it. It's not worth it.
No, it isn't. No. And that's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up. So let's say you've looked around and you're just not finding anything that seems to be the perfect fit for your family. Is it then possible to take something and adapt it to what you need for your family?
I think you have to.
Yeah, I was going to say that too.
I don't think there's any one complete curriculum that's going to be the perfect fit for any particular child. Whether they need to go faster, they need to go slower, you need to subtract stuff, you need to add stuff. It's something that you need to morph the curriculum to fit your needs.
And I think that it's very important, whether you're struggling with kids who have learning issues or not, to give yourself permission to do that. Just because you spend money and get a curriculum does not mean you are now tied to using that curriculum exactly the way it's written. And I think a lot of times we just need somebody to give us permission to go ahead and change it or fix it so it works best for your family.
Well, I can remember with one of my gifted son, I had this great curriculum, and actually it was ended up being a good curriculum for him, but I had to get out of the way. Instead of trying to teach it to him or whatever, if I would just let him have it, say, okay, go for it, this is what you're supposed to do, just even that much of a tweak, instead of not following all the teacher directions, but just saying, this is the materials, and he's like, oh, and just getting out of his way gave him that spark of interest instead of being bored to death as he lumbered through it at my pace, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
I think in terms of tools can be used in a variety of ways.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, people hold hammers. Often it's the same way, but it could be left-handed, it could be right-handed, it could be choking up on it a little shorter or holding it at the far end. You know, the same type of thing. You take that tool, but the way you use the tool is going to be more individualized.
That's hard to learn.
It is. It is very hard, I think, too, to allow ourselves to do that, to realize that there's nobody peering over our shoulders saying, whoops, you missed that one, or you can't do it that way. And I think it's good, and so we'll consider this us giving people the permission to do that because
fine with me.
Sometimes you just need a little encouragement.
Yeah.
So I think we've started to touch on this already. What about a combination of resources?
Like Brenda,
I'm all for that.
like Brenda, you mentioned about how you did some subjects at home and then you outsourced some of them.
Right.
So how did that work
Right.
as far as, did you have to take her somewhere? How did that work on a practical basis?
Yeah, we had to take her, and my son Ben also did some, but it was just a matter of finding the rides and getting her to the places that she needed to go. But it really worked out very, very well. I can't imagine having tried to teach her those subjects on my own. But finding the right person is really the key, I think.
So it's networking.
And networking, knowing what other parents in your area are good at. I taught a writing class because I'm much more of a writer than I am a math person. And so I had high school kids in my home a couple of days a week. So, it's just find people who are good at things that you aren't and be willing to trade off.
And I think sometimes that's where it starts. I remember when we came up against a year and there was a subject that I really felt I needed some help with my kids, and so I went to a group of women that I knew, happened to know through our church, and said, okay, here's the deal. I have some education and experience in biology. I will be willing to provide a biology lab class one day a week if one of you would be willing to cover this subject that I'm struggling with teaching to my kids. And sometimes it's just as simple as that. It doesn't have to be this big, complex, complicated co-op setup. Sometimes it's just purely the barter system. I'll do for you where I excel if you'll do for me where you excel.
And I know where I live, we've got a small local, like a Christian college. It's actually in my town. But I know a lot of homeschool people in my area, they will call up, say, the math department, the English department, whatever, and say, do you have a student who's away from home and lonely or whatever and would like to tutor my student in whatever? And they offer them, a meal once a week, and maybe they provide them, they take them to the store once a week or something, because they can't have cars and it's really a small town. But something like that, so it's a barter system as well, but they can, if there isn't a mom or you can't find that, there's a lot of other resources with local colleges, community colleges, those kind of things where people would love to tutor a kid in your own home, so you can keep an eye on things as well.
Sure, sure. So any other thoughts before we move on from this topic of teaching tools? Anything that you ladies have found that you think was unique to your family that worked really well, or have we pretty much covered some of the things that you found to be successful?
One tool that I've used here, and it's not necessarily unique to my family, but it's just a concept of work boxes. And Sue Patrick has a website and that you can look at, but it organized all our school. It's like a 3D schedule, so you have everything that your kid needs for a subject in a box. And when I first heard of it, I thought, oh, that sounds too organized for me. But it turned out to be a great thing. No, we don't have lost books anymore. My kids knew what was expected of them and what was coming next. And, it was just kind of a simple little thing that we implemented that made a huge difference in our school day.
So how would that look? How would one of your work boxes look, Mary?
Well, like for math, they have their math book in there. They'd have their ruler and protractor and a pencil and scratch paper. Everything's right there in that box. So they don't have to go looking for anything. And then if they come to that box and they need help and I'm working, with my other child, they know that they can either try to work through it themselves or go on to the next box and do whatever's next and then come back and get my help after that.
So what work boxes would you have for a student? Like what would be what one of your children has as their work boxes for the day?
Oh, okay. I have one for history. I have one for Bible memory, one for spelling, one for language arts or writing, grammar, whatever our focus is that year, one for science. So all the main subjects we've done.
Mm-hmm.
So if folks were interested in seeing how this might work practically, is there a website they could look for, or Google, or is it just called Work Boxes?
It is just called Work Boxes, and if you Google that, you'll probably come up with a bunch of blogs and websites on there, or ask on the Sonlight forums. There's a book on workboxes that Sue Patrick wrote that, they could Google that name too and find it. I could probably come up with a website here in a minute if you want me to.
That'd be great, because sometimes we just need a direction, so,
Yeah.
where to get started. So,
and if they do go to the Sonlight forums, the Homeschool Support and Methods has a lot of threads on workboxes. Different
Yeah,
they even have pictures of how they do it, and maybe the moderator there could make a sticky and put some of those at the top so people could find it.
that would be great.
That
would be good.
So, but yeah, any kids that struggle, whether or not they struggle with organization, but especially if they do, or kids with ADD or any kind of thing where they just need to know what's next. I have my one son, he likes to be very structured and know what's coming next, and I tend to fly by the seat of my pants sometimes. So, but that really helped him, and I found it helped me too. So,
I think it would help accelerated students too. I think accelerated students would benefit too, because then they could just go at their own pace and get it done without having to wait for you to tell them what to do next.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. The website is workboxsystem.com. So it's written all as one word. Workboxsystem.com.
Great. Awesome. And I think what you said just a minute ago, Mary, about, you tend to fly by the seat of your pants, but your son needs to know what comes next. That's a perfect example of being a student of your child.
Yes.
You know what your teaching organizational lifestyle is, and you have learned by experience and by observing him and by taking the time to figure out what his learning style is. And you found a great way to accommodate that so he's not frustrated. And I think that's a lot of what we're talking about here is just figuring out what works best for your child and be willing to go after it.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about the future. I don't care who you are as a parent, whether you're homeschooling your kids or not, whether your kids struggle with learning or excel at learning. The future is something that we all look at, we plan for, we wonder, will our kids reach the goals that we hopefully have set for them. And so let's talk for just a minute about the future of kids who have different learning issues. Let's talk for a minute about a struggling learner. Maybe you have a kid that you've worked with and has many challenges in different areas of learning, and you're pretty confident that college is not going to be an option for this child. And amazingly, college is not the only educational option out there or the only option for a child once they've finished high school. So what about that child? What other options are there for kids who just are not bent toward college?
I can kind of talk to that issue too, because I did have a son who had some dysgraphia and had a really hard time and struggled through school. And when he graduated, I was really afraid he'd never be able to work outside of the home and support himself. It just seemed totally beyond his abilities. But suddenly things started clicking, and he decided he wanted to join the Air Force and managed remarkably to get the job that he wanted as a firefighter. And he was able to develop the compensating skills that he needed, where he was #1 in his class in every class that he's had in the last 3 years.
Awesome.
Despite everything. So just because they've got a label on them or they've struggled all the way through, don't give up on them. Like, there is hope.
Any other thoughts?
This isn't an area I've explored a lot, but, I just think about, apprenticeship type opportunities or, a tech school kind of opportunities. I think there's a lot more out there than what we tend to think of. We tend to think in simplistic terms. And again, I think it comes back to, be willing to network, be willing to talk to people around you and find out what opportunities there are. Yeah. And there may even be college opportunities for kids who struggle that people haven't considered. I know one website I came across when I was looking into dyslexia has all kinds of helps for kids who struggle with that. So sometimes just because a child struggles in a certain area and we might think, oh, that's going to preclude them from being able to go on to college, maybe not necessarily.
Good point. Good point.
So
I know.
that website.
Go ahead.
Oh, I have a link for that website if anyone wants
Awesome.
that. It was
Please do.
www.dyslexia-college.com.
Not hard to remember.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we found with our kids as well was volunteer opportunities sometimes opened up future possibilities that probably we would not have considered had we not done that. A lot of times local hospitals will have teenage volunteer programs. It gives your child an opportunity to step into the healthcare system and get a hands-on experience that they wouldn't otherwise get. And there are a lot of tech opportunities when it comes to the healthcare system. And so I know we found in our small community that the local medical center had this just great teenage volunteer opportunity for high schoolers. And our daughter was able to become involved in that, and it gave her an opportunity to experience lots of different medical fields, radiology, physical therapy, ER nursing, just a lot of different things. And while she ultimately did not decide to go into the healthcare field, she said to me one day, you know what, I have really appreciated this 4 years of volunteering, not only because of what I've learned about myself, but also because of what I learned I don't want to do. And it helped her to mark a lot of things off her list. So those are some good opportunities.
The approach of shadowing, that's the idea of learning what they don't want to do. Sometimes our kids get this vision that they want to do this and they want to be this, and ultimately when they get into that environment, they find out that really wasn't what matches them at all. But if they have that opportunity to volunteer, to shadow someone in that field, if your child will volunteer to go along as a gopher for that person, or do whatever so that they can see what they do, experience, maybe get their hands into it some way, they may discover that really is a good match for me or that isn't, and then find other opportunities. We think apprenticeship is a thing of the 17 and 1800s, but I think it can still be done, it can still be approached in many areas, and there are many hands-on fields, plumbing and such as that require a lot of experience before you can reach higher levels and do the testing to get qualifications. So there's opportunity to do a version of an apprenticeship that can expose them to what they're interested in and verify a lot of different aspects of the life.
And probably what we've already talked about, too, the networking. If you network with other moms, other people in the area, all that kind of thing, you'll probably find out what's available in your area, even going to the library and talking to her and so many other things. That's probably the key to a lot of this is the networking, I think.
Yeah, good point. So let's talk about kids who are ready to move on to college but at a much younger age. Is that an option? Is that wise? What do you ladies think?
Well, my daughter started college as a full-fledged freshman at 15 last year, so I've got a little bit of experience with this. What I would suggest to parents is, unless your child is the one doing the pushing. And my daughter came to me at 12 with her plan of how she was going to graduate from high school by 15. I was like, yeah, sure, and last year you wanted to be a rock star, so it's fine, whatever. But she worked through her summers, she worked late at night, and she did it. And if your child is the one that's doing the pushing and is constantly working and trying to bulldoze ahead, great, fantastic. But you've got to be willing to start letting them fly. You can't be a helicopter parent when they're at college. There's a lot of drawbacks. Driving carpool to college because she wasn't old enough to have a driver's license yet. And dealing with the social situation. And we've been very, very fortunate in that she got in with a good group of kids. She has some great faculty sponsors and mentors and all. But it's going to have to be a kid-by-kid decision. It's not something that you can blanket say every kid who's gifted should go to college at 15. Or
in your situation, she's still living at home. She's going to classes during the day, right?
Definitely.
I would think that would be the better approach with a young one than putting them on the campus, living in the dorms, et cetera.
Right. I mean, at this point, she'll go away to college at 17 as a sophomore, and I'm still not entirely, or as a junior, excuse me, and I'm not entirely comfortable with that, but we'll cross that bridge when it comes.
There you go. But again, it sounds to me like being a student of your child, you knew what she was ready for.
Right.
I'm wondering, too, if in some cases a child may be academically ready for college at 14 or 15, but perhaps not emotionally or socially ready to make that step.
And in that case, there's a lot of online type college courses that they can be doing while living at home, while staying at home and learning at home, as opposed to going on a college campus.
They could also study for like CLEP tests, so they could study, like, say, their American history and do it in depth, and look at the CLEP book for how to take the CLEP American history test. And then when you take that test, when you're finished, no matter what age you are, then you can get, in most colleges that I know of anyway, you can get college credit for that. That's one way too that they can also, I've heard of kids, I mean, my kids didn't do this, but I know people whose kids have gone on a mission trip, have started maybe their own business for a year. They've worked on that for part of their time before they go to college. They've maybe gotten a job or volunteered, as Judy said. They use their curriculum as a jumping off point, so that they use the curriculum, but then they say, okay, let's do further research on there. And you go ahead and, get a project going or whatever. And if you can find, I think it comes back to your local support group too, if you can find another kindred spirit, someone that maybe you could meet with, they have another kid that maybe is interested in the same thing, or just maybe another family that has some kids that are accelerated, so they have someone whom they can relate to. That helps a lot too. Even if you don't want to send them to college, they don't have to stop learning and moving forward.
Exactly.
I think what I'm hearing here, Mary referenced it, and I think Jill did too, when we were talking about kids who struggle with learning. That's not automatically a guarantee that college is off the board. And I think we're also hearing that if your child is academically advanced, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready for college at 15.
Right.
I think what we're saying is we have to be careful not to compare our kids to other kids their age or their situation. I think we have to look at our children, pray about our child's future, and make decisions with them and for them based on what we know about them, not about what everyone else is doing.
And you're liable to make mistakes. I mean, we do, You can think this is really the best thing, and then you can look back and say, well, that wasn't too smart. But, I mean, how are you going to know? You've got to be willing to risk it, and you've got to realize that probably every single one of us has made mistakes, and that's just part of parenting. That's just part of going for it. We would have made the mistakes whether they were homeschooled or not homeschooled, whether they were advanced or whether they were, had learning challenges. I think that's just something we have to just accept.
So let's finish up our conversation about the future here. We mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that we weren't going to be discussing specific diagnoses, but let's just focus for a minute on the benefits of a diagnosis. Is there wisdom in taking your kids in? Perhaps you recognize that your child really does well in a number of academics, and so is it time to get an IQ test and put a number on how smart they are? Maybe your child really wrestles with learning to read. Maybe you have a 7 or 8-year-old who's still learning their letters of the alphabet. Is there wisdom in taking them and having them tested and having a label put on the struggle that they're having? What are your thoughts?
I think it can be helpful in certain situations. I mean, one benefit of having a diagnosis is just knowing what it is that is the issue perhaps that your child struggles with, and then how to address it. I think sometimes we fear that idea of a diagnosis, but it really does open doors as far as, well, here's now how we can deal with this issue. It can also be helpful in some cases. It can be helpful in some cases for things like getting accommodations on testing, like entrance tests to college and things like that.
So if you use it as a jumping off point instead of a box to keep you locked in.
Right, yes.
That's a good way to put it.
I know when we had my son tested and the diagnosis came back, we waited until he was 16. It was like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. Like, I'm not crazy. There is a problem here, and it's not just that he's lazy. So it was a benefit in that way for me.
Mm-hmm. Are there any downfalls to a diagnosis?
I think if you allow it to be a box, it can be.
Yeah, your child isn't summed up by their struggle. I mean, that would be to take your eyes off of all the giftings that they have. And all of us ultimately have giftings and have struggles.
Good
and
point.
To define somebody by their struggles is, would be an unfair way of looking at a person, I think. So,
it's not their identity.
Right, yeah.
Their identity.
Don't limit your child. Yeah.
In our family, since we have kids at both ends of the spectrum, we have this point of we don't talk about what someone can't do. We talk about what they can do. Mike may have his learning disabilities, but he is the most incredible photographer you have ever seen. And sure, Katie could spell anything at 4, but she had her downsides too. Her temper was something else. But we talk about what the positives about people, not the negatives.
I think one of the things we found, one of our kids was diagnosed at birth with some physical issues. And my husband and I talked long and hard about how far would we go. He had a genetic disorder. How far would we go in pursuing a diagnosis? And while we did get the answers that we needed in order to allow us to continue with his medical care, we pretty much kept those to ourselves. And it was not so much because we didn't want to box him in, but we did not want others to view him differently.
Yeah.
And so we have had many people, he's 16 now, and I've had opportunity to talk with other parents whose kids faced medical issues as infants, and I would share our story, and they would look at me and say, I would have never known that about him. And my response would be, that's on purpose, because we wanted him to try anything he wanted to try, and to do anything that he was motivated to try. And even today, it amazes me how he compensates and is able to do things that I would just think he never could. And so sometimes a diagnosis is not so much boxing in your child, but it is protecting your child from other people's expectations.
And to give you the tools you need to make the most of that child, help that child to make the most of their education and their abilities.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered just some amazing things here. I think this conversation has just been full of very practical suggestions, and it's always great to hear real-life stories of other folks who are walking the same path we are, perhaps. As we wrap this up, I'd like to take just a couple of minutes, especially for you and Brenda and Mary, to maybe just offer some last words of encouragement to folks who might be listening to our webinar today. So, Brenda, why don't you go ahead and maybe share just a couple minutes, some final words of encouragement for those who are wrestling with kids who have accelerated learners.
Okay, what I'd like to really encourage you is just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to let them be smarter than you. Don't be afraid to learn alongside of them. Go ahead and find those outside resources that you need. What you really need to do is just give them the tools that they need to succeed, and then just get out of their way. And let them develop at their own rate, whether that's at a rate that you think is right or not. Remember that they're going to start and stop along the way. And throughout the whole process, let them be a kid. You know, even if they're working way, way, way ahead of their quote-unquote grade level, remember, you've still got a little kid there, and just give them the time that they need.
That's awesome. Thanks. Mary, how about you?
Yeah, that's really good. And I would just add, yes, give them the time that they need, and don't be afraid of learning challenges. All our kids are going to have different giftings, different strengths, different weaknesses, and I think sometimes those, the thought of our kids struggling in some area is really intimidating, and I would say, don't let that stop you. Learn what you need to learn to help them. And don't be afraid to fail. You might try something and you might fall flat on your face. It might not work out, and that's okay. We need to be willing to take risks sometimes to see what is going to work and what is going to help our kids. And just keep going to the Lord, and He will walk us through.
Thank you, ladies. Those are some very encouraging, uplifting words. Just a couple of other practical resources as we wrap up here. We've mentioned throughout this webinar the Sonlight forums, and I wanted to let you know that we do have a couple of different forums, one for parents who have kids who are struggling with their learning, another for parents who have kids that are accelerated in their learning, and you can see the URL right there on your screen. Type that in, and that will take you over to the Sonlight forums. And if you're not already a member on the forums, just click on the register link, and that will allow you to sign up, and you can go take a look at those two forums. We also have a wonderful staff of specially trained advisors. They're homeschool moms who have used Sonlight for many, many years. They are happy to talk with you during regular business hours during the week about how you might choose the appropriate Sonlight materials for your students, and then how you might put them into use in your homeschool. So the forums and our advisor team, both really great resources for finding the materials that you need to teach your children. So again, ladies, I really appreciate the time you carved out today to be part of our conversation. Hopefully we've shared some things that will be an encouragement to others who are walking this same path. It's been a pleasure as always, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Judy. It was great.
Awesome. Thanks, it's been fun.